Hey friend, do you chart your cycles? Do you know what charting your cycles is? A lot of times when I ask women if they're charting their cycles, they tell me, yes, I get my period about the 13th of every month, or I keep it tracked how many days I'm having a menstrual flow. But that's actually not what charting your cycle is. And I want to talk about this because this is something that's so important when we're looking at how can we improve our health or how can we listen better to our bodies. We must start charting our cycles. If you're new here, I'm Rita Johnson. I'm the owner of Divine Mercy Nutritional Care, and I help women to take their health back into their own hands through dietary changes, lifestyle, mindset work, and at-home lab testing. So often when I ask someone, are you charting your cycles? I can tell that they feel really confident that they know what I'm asking. But what I'm actually asking is if they track every day throughout the month, not only how long their period is, but what other random spotting or bleeding they're seeing, what their cervical mucus looks like, perhaps even their temperature that they're taking from one day to the next. All of these things really matter and tell us more about what's going on in your body with your hormones fluctuating throughout the month. And if we're not doing this, we're actually missing out on some really critical information. The chart can become a diagnostic tool. That's why there are physicians trained in naprotechnology and now so many other FEM and Chart Neo and other ways that physicians are able to utilize a chart as a diagnostic tool. In other words, they can look at a chart and know these are things I might be concerned about for you in your health journey, and these are things I'm not quite as worried about. So it can help us to rule things out and narrow down the plan of what tests we need to run or what else could be going on. So when we get started with charting, it can be very overwhelming because there's a lot of different symptoms you can track, and there's a lot of different methodologies in how to start with charting. The best one is the one that works for you and your body and your life at this very moment. So let's kind of walk through a few of these different options, and then really when you're looking forward from here on where do I go, how do I get started, I'm also going to put a resource in the notes to this that has a quiz that you can go take to kind of see what would be the best way that I can get started. I highly recommend getting trained by an instructor, especially if you need the charting to help you determine when your fertile and infertile window is occurring so that you can use it as a natural way of regulating your fertility and using it truly for family planning. If your intent, however, is just to get a really good look at what's going on with your cycle and with your fertility, if you're trying to look for a baseline of where your hormones are, and then also see how things are changing as you make a dietary change or really start to increase your muscle mass or whatever changes that you're making, we will see that in the charting as well. And oftentimes it can be something that we see positively or not so positively. We could even see negative changes happen as a result of monitoring your charting and when we're making those changes. So the first type of charting that I want to talk about is mucus-only methods. So these are where basically every time you're going to the bathroom, you're checking to see what cervical mucus, if any, is present in that day. There's different varying degrees of ways to do the cervical mucus observations. Some are very systematic, like the Creighton model, and some are more, how would you describe that? And so they would be much more like interpretive for your personal body. The very systematic is the Creighton model, is probably the gold standard with that. And in Divine Mercy Nutritional Care, I do have women that teach the Creighton model charting. So if that's something you're interested in, I'll also have a link to that in the description notes as well. However, that's not always super helpful for people, especially if they're having lots of inflammation and they're noticing mucus their entire cycle long. Sometimes it can be really difficult to see where is the fertile and infertile window happening. Another time it can be really difficult is if you're not seeing a lot of cervical mucus. If it's really dry a lot throughout the month, that can also be problematic to really kind of seeing more cervical mucus and knowing where you're at in terms of your fertility and infertility. So another option you can do is a temperature, so basal body temperature. Basically, as your progesterone levels increase after ovulation, it serves to warm up our body. Think about it as incubating and preparing your body for that new life, which can happen at ovulation. So as that temperature rises, then we know that we have confirmed ovulation has happened. However, temperature can be a little tricky. If you're somebody that works nights, if you have a little baby that maybe you don't sleep through the night or at least get a solid 3 hours of sleep before you wake up in the morning, those things can definitely throw off the temperature. In addition to sickness, obviously if we have a fever, but even alcohol the night before and NSAIDs, those can all impact your thermometer reading as well. So because of that, it's often not used as a standalone method. Very often people will combine. They'll use something more like a multiple symptom method. So Symptothermal is an example of this, SymptoPro, there's several others, where they're looking at cervical mucus, but a little bit more general, and the temperature. And then, of course, there are monitors galore. The tricky thing sometimes with monitors is that oftentimes they teach really to trust the monitor. So in other words, if things are a little crazy in terms of what you're observing, if you're under a lot of stress or if you're not seeing consistent cycles and you're noticing cervical mucus or different observations and it's almost like it's contradicting the reading on the monitor, they would say to trust the monitor almost implicitly. And so that's where that can get a little tricky, particularly when we're under a lot of stress. We can see things, we would call it a double peak cycle in the Creighton model, where you start to ovulate and then your body responds to that stress by delaying ovulation until that stress has passed, and then ovulation returns. So if you have a monitor that says, yes, you're ovulating, but you don't continue to take that monitor because the test strips are expensive and it registered that you were high ovulation or peak ovulation even, but it can actually mimic ovulation, but then your body will wait to release that egg until the stress has passed. That can be very likely when you actually end up conceiving on a cycle like that, type of double peak cycle. So these are just some benefits to the different types of methods, and what I truly find is that there's no one perfect method for everybody, and there's oftentimes not even a perfect method for everybody at all seasons of their life. So it's really important for us to know that there are multiple options. But women, I really recommend you chart your cycles, make those observations, because it makes such a big difference when we're making changes in our dietary life, in whatever ways you're trying to tweak and get healthier and improve your hormone balance. We can see it tangibly reacting through the charting. And it's a great gift to be able to have that. And it's also very validating for our health to know we're moving in the right direction or not, or to understand why we are feeling the way that we are. When we have a chart that's a hot mess and we feel like a hot mess, it's extremely validating and very helpful to have that additional information. So if you want help with getting started with charting, feel free to reach out. Like I said, I have practitioners that teach the Creighton model charting, but there are lots of different methods, and just remember, no one method is right for everybody. Just get charting your cycles.